Have you ever wondered what happened to that man who condemned Jesus Christ to death? It was Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who washed his hands before the crowd to show his innocence of the act. He left a mark on history, but at what cost? Did he live out his days in peace, or did he always be haunted by the choice that changed the world? This is the story of Pontius Pilate, a man torn between imperial power and divine fate, ambition and guilt. As we reveal the rise, the fateful encounter with Jesus, and the tragic fall of Pilate, layer by layer, the politics, betrayal, and regret that constituted his life will be unveiled. This is not a simple story of an ancient governor to the land of Judea, but a timeless parable about moral compromise and ambition bought at a very dear price. Early life and career in Rome of Pilate Pontius. Pilate was born around 10 BC in the Roman province of Samnium. His family was of the equestrian class, a rank just one tier below that of senators, but still part of Rome's elite. Equestrians were expected to perform military duties, manage an estate, and then fill in with administrative duties throughout the empire. His early life was filled with lessons in Roman values: courage, discipline, honor, and belief in the supremacy of Roman law. As a young boy, he learned of Rome's mythical ancestors, Julius Caesar and Augustus, and all those who had extended the empire's boundaries. Stories of Roman victories in Germania, Hispania, and Britannia were oft repeated, and he longed to see his name among the great leaders of Rome. The equestrian class was an ambitious one, and Pilate was no different. In his late teens, Pilate joined the Roman legions, starting at the front lines of Rome's military machine. His first postings were in Germania, a wild and dangerous territory full of hostile tribes. There was a cold winter, fierce battle, and the threat of ambush at almost every turn. Soon enough, Pilatus showed himself to be a competent officer, a man of strategy, one who did not shrink away from making the hard decisions. The men respected him, not only because he was brave in battle, but also because he was strict in discipline. It was in Germania that he learned what would be one of those lasting lessons. In order to rule, one had to inspire two things: fear and respect. John Dominic Crossan, in The Birth of Christianity, highlights how Pilate's seminal years as a Roman military man shaped his most autocratic style of administration. As Crossan goes on to state, having experienced the cruelties of war, Pilate was very much the supporter of the Pax Romana, or peace through overwhelming power and terror. After years of service in the Roman legions, Pilate returned to Rome, intent on converting military success into political power. He joined that class of wealthy men known as the Equestrian Order, from which Rome drew its administrators, judges, and military commanders. The presiding ambition before Pilate's mind was to rise through the ranks with a governorship which would bring him considerable wealth and power. Strategic alliances, including with the influential head of the Praetorian Guard, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, powered Pilate's rise. Sejanus was Emperor Tiberius' power behind the throne, and Pilate knew the gravity of the situation by being on his side. It was through Sejanus' influence that, in AD 26, he was appointed the 5th prefect of Judea. Josephus sets up the appointment of Pilate in the context of a broader strategy by Sejanus to regain control over turbulent provinces. According to Josephus, Pilate is portrayed as someone who was ordered to go to Judea to impose strong Roman rule, reflecting Sejanus' wish for absolute loyalty and power. The journey of Pilate into Judea was filled with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. As he entered the city of Jerusalem, he was acutely aware of the region's complex history, a land of prophets, rebellions, and deep religious convictions. Judea was a province that had resisted Roman rule since its annexation in 6 AD, with frequent revolts led by zealots and messianic figures. For Pilate, this was not just a political assignment, it was an exam on how good a governor he was. Pilate's arrival in Jerusalem was not without its reactions. To the Jewish leaders, he was a new Roman governor whose intentions were not clear. To the common people, he represented the latest symbol of Roman oppression. The first set of actions on his part would set the tone for his governorship, with his first decisions designed to establish Roman authority. Pilate's early governance in Judea. One of the first major decisions of Pilate in Judea was to bring Roman standards carrying the image of Emperor Tiberius into Jerusalem. The standards were certainly symbols of Roman power, but they also constituted a violation of Jewish laws against graven images. For Pilate, it was a necessary assertion of authority. For the Jews, it was a sacrilege which could not be tolerated. The Jews protested most strongly, and the affair at once became an uproar. Thousands of Jews appeared before Pilate's residence, demanding that he withdraw the standards. Pilate was notorious for his obstinacy, and he refused. He ordered his soldiers to round up the protesters and was ready with any number of them as would not retire. Helen K. Bonn, in Pontius Pilate in History and Interpretation, said that the way Pilate handled what has been termed the standards incident did indeed showed how uninformed he was regarding sensitivities concerning the Jewish religion. She has also documented that the decision of Pilate to eventually remove the standards after seeing the Jews' readiness to die rather than compromise their beliefs was a pragmatic retreat which nonetheless weakened his authority. Despite the early controversy, Pilate sought to modernize Judea by undertaking a series of infrastructure projects. The most ambitious project was an aqueduct to bring fresh water into Jerusalem. It was an important project as the city was growing rapidly, but since Pilate wished to finance it using temple money, the Corban, it served only to further enrage the Jews in their anger. The Corban funds had a sacred purpose and were intended for use in maintaining the temple or other religious offerings. Such funds being used for a secular purpose were an act of sacrilege, and protests immediately broke out throughout Jerusalem. Pilate, resolute to have the project completed, ordered his soldiers, disguised in civilian clothes, to attack protesters with clubs and daggers. A bloodbath ensued, killing many and injuring scores more. Relations between Pilate and the people continued to deteriorate. As Bart D. Ehrman explains in Jesus Before the Gospels, the aqueduct controversy involved more than finance. It was a symbolic battle between Roman authority and the Jews over their religious self-determination. As he says, Pilate's decision to suppress the dissent by violence was in line with his overall strategy of ruling through fear. Pilate was suspicious of the Sanhedrin, the chief ruling body among the Jews headed by a high priest Caiaphas, who was considered astute in political matters and had very good relations with the Roman officials, at least when it served the interests of the Jews. Being fully aware of Caiaphas's influence among the Jewish people, Pilate wanted to take advantage of the presence of the Sanhedrin to carry out Roman decrees, yet simultaneously keep that body at arm's length. The Sanhedrin was divided in its approach to Roman rule. Some believed in cooperation for the sake of stability, while others were more radical and tended towards resistance. To Pilate's thinking, however, the Sanhedrin was a two-edged sword, a useful tool in controlling the populace, yet a threat to Roman authority because of the influence this council held among the people. In The Death of the Messiah, Raymond E. Brown posits that the relationship between Pilate and the Sanhedrin was an uneasy alliance. According to Brown, it was pragmatic for Pilate to lean on the council for the maintenance of order, which was undermined by his heavy-handedness, as it served alienating the Jewish leadership. The governorship of Pilate in Judea was principally guided by Roman law, which required eternal vigilance. Many sects, such as the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Zealots, lived in Judea with their own way of contemplating religion, politics, and rebellion against the rule of the Romans. Pilate would naturally take support from informers on the potential uprising and ordered frequent patrolling of Roman soldiers in every nook and corner to discourage rebellion. All the same, Pilate was ill-placed to impose discipline. The Zealots, a militant Jewish party dedicated to the overthrow of Roman rule, began assassinating Roman officials and their collaborators. In turn, Pilate gave orders for mass arrests and public executions to terrorize others into refraining from such violence. The only result of these actions, however, was to increase resentment and give more sympathy to the resistance. N.T. Wright interprets in his work, The Resurrection of the Son of God, Pilate's approach to policing as the expression of Roman imperialism. For Wright, the action of Pilate was not simply to do with keeping order, but represented an extended expression of Roman power over Judean, religious, and cultural life. The arrest and trial of Jesus of Nazareth was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane during the Passover festival, which saw Jerusalem filled with Jewish pilgrims from across the region. To the Sanhedrin, Jesus represented a threat to both their ruling authority and the fragile stability of Roman rule. They accused him of blasphemy on account of his claims to be the Messiah. Yet they needed the authority of Pilate to be able to execute a death sentence. Jesus' arrest was a well-planned operation carried out under the cover of darkness to prevent public outburst. Jesus was then brought before the Sanhedrin, questioned and condemned on the basis of blasphemy. The council then brought Jesus before Pilate, portraying him to the latter not only as a religious blasphemer, but as a political insurgent, a man who was claiming to be King of the Jews, a title insinuating a claim against Roman authority. In the historical Jesus, John Dominic Crossan writes of the trial of Jesus as essentially a political event. The Sanhedrin framed the charges in such a way that Pilate was obliged to take action. According to Crossan, Pilate was initially reluctant to engage in what he took to be a theological disagreement, but the political consequences of Jesus' claims forced his hand. It was the first and one of the most dramatic moments in this encounter between Jesus and Pilate in the Gospels. A severe Roman governor faced a man showing no fear, but speaking with calm authority. The Gospel of John recorded that, among other things, Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world." Pilate was baffled by Jesus because he, unlike other rebels he had dealt with, did not preach violence or armed insurrection. It seemed that he was concerned with spiritual matters, which caught Pilate off guard. To him, Jesus wasn't a political threat, but rather a harmless religious teacher. Yet the pressure by the Sanhedrin and the outside crowd was mounting. In Pontius Pilate in History and Interpretation, Helen K. Bond describes Pilate's interaction with Jesus as a moment of true curiosity combined with political pragmatism. Indeed, for Bond, Pilate was interested in Jesus' message, but very much more concerned with order and preventing a riot. Pilate made several attempts to release Jesus. First, he offered a compromise of flogging to satisfy the Sanhedrin and the crowd with a lesser punishment. However, the crowd insisted on crucifixion, shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Thereafter, Pilate sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, hoping that Herod would take responsibility for the trial. But Herod found nothing for which he could condemn Jesus and sent Jesus back to Pilate. Now Jesus again was standing in front of Pilate. That same conundrum now presented itself again, but with even greater insistence. The crowd outside the praetorium was larger and more threatening, while the Sanhedrin insisted on execution. In desperation now, Pilate proposed to them the option of releasing a prisoner in honor of the Passover amnesty and gave them a choice: Jesus or Barabbas, an insurrectionist. In his book, The Death of the Messiah, Raymond E. Brown writes that Pilate offered to release either Jesus or Barabbas as part of a deliberate policy on Pilate's part to shift responsibility onto the crowd. Apparently, he hoped that the crowd would prefer to have Jesus, who could be discharged as an innocent man without any threat to Roman control. Since the crowd chose Barabbas, Pilate had no clear course of action. Being out of other options, Pilate had to make the fateful decision to approve Jesus' crucifixion. This he did, in the final symbolic gesture, which was washing his hands before the crowd and proclaiming, "I am innocent of this just man's blood." According to the Gospel of Matthew, this was a gesture to absolve Pilate from moral responsibility for Jesus' death. If Pilate's hand-washing was supposed to be a kind of public profession of innocence, to early Christians, it was the cowardly act and unwillingness to stand up for what was right in the face of popular pressure. Jesus was crucified with that brutal efficiency which characterized Roman executions. Soldiers nailed him onto a cross and placed a sign above his head, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." In the book entitled How Jesus Became God, Bart D. Ehrman interprets the washing of hands by Pilate as a reflection of what was happening in his mind during that time. According to Ehrman, Pilate was in a dilemma between his belief in Jesus' innocence and fear for potential unrest that leads him to make the decision that he would regret all his life. The aftermath of the crucifixion. Jesus' death did not bring the closure that Pilate had wished. Rather, it marked the beginning of a new wave of unrest about to hit Jerusalem. Reports that Jesus had resurrected from the dead started streaming in quickly among his followers, who testified to the fact that 3 days from his burial, Jesus had appeared to them alive. What was taking place for Pilate was more than a theological affront. It was a political crisis in the making. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Pilate and the Jewish leaders attempted to suppress the resurrection rumors by bribing the guards to say that Jesus' body had been taken by his disciples. However, the rumors lingered on, and the early Christian movement started to grow, attracting both Jews and Gentiles to its message. N.T. Wright, in his The Resurrection of the Son of God, suggests that such rumors were a direct threat to Roman power. He asserts that the failure of Pilate's attempt at containment had not only political, but also theological ramifications inasmuch as they tended to vindicate Jesus' claim and to impel his followers to press his cause. The political situation of Pilate after Jesus' death became more insecure. His conduct at the trial was criticized by both Jewish authorities and Roman functionaries. The Sanhedrin blamed Pilate for failing to prevent the spread of Jesus' message, while for Roman officials, he was incapable of maintaining order. The more populous the early Christian movement became, the more paranoid was Pilate. He was obsessed with eliminating all of Jesus' followers through mass arrests and harsh punishment against anyone preaching the resurrection. But it only fanned the flames, each move of persecution seemingly making the movement grow stronger. Eusebius of Caesarea views in ecclesiastical history the increasing paranoia of Pilate as representative of God's judgment. According to Eusebius, by failing to suppress the movement, the failure in governance by Pilate signifies God's will, a punishment for the condemnation of Jesus to death. It is said that this decision did not leave Pilate's conscience clear, and he was often tormented by an extremely bitter dream in which Jesus appeared before him with reproaching looks for injustice. Claudia Procula, his wife, also claimed the same Jesus appeared to her on several occasions, asking her to take action on his behalf. She saw it as a divine warning due to these recurring dreams. Claudia believed that both she and her husband were being punished because of their involvement in the death of Jesus. Even though she had warned Pilate not to have anything to do with him, already burdened by political failures, a moral and spiritual crisis Pilate could not escape was at hand. In Embassy to Gaius, the Alexandrian fellow describes the mental decline of Pilate because of all political pressures and personal guilt. According to him, a sense of regret finally was killing him. In AD 36, Pilate's governorship in Judea was brought to an abrupt close. He was recalled to Rome by Emperor Tiberius after a bloodbath of Samaritans on Mount Gerizim. A large number of Samaritans had assembled on the mountain after reports that sacred vessels were found, and Pilate ordered a massacre, suspecting the possibility of a rebellion. This brutality even shocked the Roman authorities, and it was the intervention of Lucius Vitellius, the governor of Syria, that led to this incident. He ordered Pilate to return to Rome to face a tribunal. Thus, this signaled the end of Pilate's governorship in Judea. It would also not be a triumphal return to Rome, but a trial one that was going to decide whether he had failed as a governor or just as a piece in Rome's intricate political game. Helen K. Bond also says in Pontius Pilate in History and Interpretation that Pilate was recalled due to some series of failures, which culminated into the massacre of the Samaritan. According to Bond, this failure was not only personal, but also had something to do with Rome's struggle to keep hold of the provinces. On returning to Rome, there awaited an accusing tribunal for him on grounds of mismanagement, cruelty, and failure to maintain order in Judea. Since Emperor Tiberius was already in declining health, the political allies were few for Pilate. His enemies were anxious to bring him down. This trial was the last act of his political career. He was now divested of his powers, sent into exile to Galla region very far from Rome, with its power and prestige. This is a very ignominious end of a man who had arrogated great powers over the people of Judea. Tertullian is an early Christian theologian who viewed the trial conducted by Pilate as one of divine retribution. As stated by Tertullian, Pilate needed to fall because he condemned Jesus to death. It was thus a divine punishment fitting for one who will bring a just sentence upon unjust rulers. He lived a life of obscurity and isolation, exiled. The once powerful presence was now to be regarded no more than that of some disgraced official with memories of his actions against his will in Judea. Day by day, the health of Pilate deteriorated. He grew reclusive and spoke only to his wife and a few loyal servants. Exile for Pilate was marked by regret and missed redemption. He reportedly spent the last years contemplating how it all came about, often replaying the trial of Jesus in his mind. Claudia Procula, wife of Pilate, continued to hold that their fate was simply the hand of divine punishment for what happened to Jesus. Eusebius of Caesarea, in ecclesiastical history, portrays the exiled life of Pilate as being spent in repentance and regret. As per Eusebius, indeed Pilate felt repentance, but this repentance was too late to change his life course. Pilate's death, legend and reality. Indeed, the death of Pilate has uncertain features, with different sources having different versions. Eusebius of Caesarea states that Pilate committed suicide during the reign of Emperor Caligula because he could not bear the burden of his guilt and ignominy. If true, it was the alleged suicide of Pilate that was accounted for by the early Christian world as a form of divine retribution and thus fit for the man who sent Jesus to his end. The story of Pilate's suicide became part of the early Christian lore, serving as a moral lesson about the consequences of ruling unjustly. It was further elaborated by Eusebius of Caesarea that the suicide was not as a result of despair, but rather as a parting gift from above. According to Eusebius's account of the death of Pilate, it had been a consummation of God's judgment upon him, which consolidates the belief that rulers who unjustly act will ultimately meet God's dealing. Other accounts give different versions of how Pilate spent his last days. Several early Christian writings are unanimous in their accounts that, before his death, Pilate had a conversion and believed Jesus was the Son of God, asking for forgiveness for his sins. In these accounts, he was portrayed as one who finally achieved spiritual salvation. Lacking historical grounding, these tales mirror the urge to regard Pilate not as a villain, but as a tragic figure who sought ultimate redemption. All these different renderings use Pilate's character for one purpose: to give hope of forgiveness, even for the most serious wrongdoing. In the writings of Tertullian, a more sympathetic Pilate emerges, indeed one whose regret and possible conversion represent God's mercy. Tertullian gives another account with respect to the personality that was Pilate, in which the theme of redemption under indebted and overwhelming guilt is present. The medieval legends continued to tell the story of Pilate as one of the restless spirits doomed to roam the earth. In one version, his body was thrown into a lake in the Alps, and whenever it came to the surface, there were supernatural storms. Yet another version confines his soul in a cavern of a mountain, ceaselessly tortured by its recollection. These legends, even though fiction, testify to the broader view of Pilate as a man whose choices had eternal consequences. The story of Pilate became a cautionary tale about the risks of moral compromise and the staying power of guilt. Pilate's legacy in theology, art, and culture. He holds a prime place in Christian theology for having passed an order confirming the crucifixion of Jesus. His name features in the Nicene Creed, so as to ensure his bequeathed legacy is remembered as part of one of the most important events in human history. In Christian doctrine, Pilate is generally viewed as a symbol of moral weakness and one who failed to right the wrongs of justice. This, as N.T. Wright states in The Resurrection of the Son of God, is not a historical statement about Pilate's position regarding the crucifixion, but a theological one to the nature of power and authority. According to him, Pilate is the example of how humankind has failed in its governance face to face with divine truth, a failure that Jesus reversed through his resurrection. Pilate's character has been portrayed in various works of art, literature, and film, mostly as a tragic or morally ambiguous character. In medieval passion plays, he was portrayed as a villain, a representative of the corrupt Roman state. In modern literature, as in Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, he is portrayed as indecisive, knowing of Jesus' innocence, yet unable to do anything to save him. The story of Pilate has been a means for writers and artists to comment on aspects of power, justice, and redemption. His character acts somewhat as a mirror to our moral dilemmas, testing us to imagine how we might act in similar circumstances. It is this very richness which explains, according to Helen K. Bond in her work Pontius Pilate in History and Interpretation, the endurance of Pilate's legacy in art and culture. As Bond says, the story of Pilate remains with us because it speaks to the greater human experience of choice and moral failure. Pontius Pilate's life and decisions greatly influenced both history and culture. His participation in the crucifixion of Jesus determined the very course of Western civilization, shaping the religious mind and contours of its legal and ethical thought. The story of Pilate remains a source of considerable argument, reflection, and reinterpretation, since it makes one grapple with questions of power, responsibility, and redemption. The story of Pilate is less of a historical narration than a cautionary one of moral compromise, the consequences of yielding to public pressure, and the tragedy of a missed redemption. His life and death challenge us to the choices we make in life and the kind of courage it takes to stand up for what is right, even when that comes at great personal cost. The story of Pontius Pilate's life is a powerful tale of ambition, authority, and moral conflict. The story shaped not only the fate of Judea, but the whole course of Western civilization. It is this decision to authorize the crucifixion of Jesus that sealed not only his fate, but is considered a pivotal moment in history, shaping millions of lives and beliefs over centuries. Pilate's path is to test our resolve in view of our moral dilemmas, whether one would dare to take up a stand for what was right, even against personal jeopardy. If this story has you enthralled, then do not miss our next video, which is The Origin of Europeans According to the Bible. It's an in-depth look at ancient texts and historical accounts that bring to light the fascinating origins of European peoples from a biblical worldview. Click the link and continue deeper into history and theology. Before you go, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with all history and thought-provoking story lovers. Your support helps us bring you more engaging content. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.